Imagine this. One day, war sirens echo through a European city. And for the first time in 75 years, no one knows if America will come. Not because America is weak. Not because NATO collapsed. But because something far more dangerous is unfolding. Trust is eroding. In Germany, the economic engine and strategic core of Europe, a growing majority now believes the United States is no longer the guardian of global stability, but part of the uncertainty itself. This is not enemy propaganda. This is not speculation. This is a measurable shift inside the mindset of America's closest ally. And that changes everything. Because the real question is no longer whether the Western alliance still exists. The real question is this. What happens when America's closest partners begin preparing for a world without America? That shift is no longer theoretical. It is happening now. For more than 7 decades, since the creation of NATO, one belief anchored Europe's security order. If war came, the United States would stand at the front. That assumption felt untouchable. Then January 2026 arrived. A survey from the Institute für Demoskopie Allensbach delivered a jolt. 65% of respondents in Germany now describe the United States as one of the greatest threats to global peace. 2 years earlier, that number stood at 24%. In 2025, it climbed to 46%. In just 24 months, public perception nearly tripled. This is not normal political fluctuation. It is structural movement. And it is happening in Germany, Europe's largest economy, its industrial backbone, and a central pillar of NATO's defense architecture. Public opinion here carries geopolitical weight. Military alliances do not survive on treaties alone. They survive on belief. When the majority of citizens begin questioning their strongest ally, the psychological foundation of the alliance starts to crack. And the numbers go further. Only 32% of Germans say they are confident the United States would provide military assistance if Europe were attacked. 35% do not believe it would. 33% remain unsure. That means collective defense, the core promise embedded in Article 5, no longer feels guaranteed to most of the public. In deterrence theory, perception matters as much as firepower. If commitment looks uncertain, deterrence weakens. What makes this even more striking is what did not change. 81% of respondents still see Russia as the primary threat. 46% name China. This is not a pivot toward America's rivals. It is a crisis of confidence in American leadership itself. And here lies the shock. The Western alliance still exists on paper. Its military structures remain intact. But its psychological core, trust, is fracturing. In geopolitics, tectonic shifts rarely begin with tanks or missiles. They begin with perception. And that shift is already underway. Every military alliance rests on more than troops and weapons. It rests on trust. For decades, Europe built its security architecture on a simple assumption: when crisis comes, the United States shows up. That assumption no longer feels automatic. In January 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House. Foreign policy signals shifted again. Old debates resurfaced. Commitments sounded conditional. For many European capitals, the issue is not one individual. It is volatility. American strategy can pivot sharply within a single election cycle. And in international relations, that instability has a name: strategic uncertainty. Uncertainty about whether a great power will actually honor its commitments when the cost becomes real. When that uncertainty rises, allies recalculate. At the same time, the global balance is moving. China expands its economic and technological reach, creating a new center of gravity in the international system. Russia continues to project military pressure along Europe's borders, reminding policymakers that conventional war is not a relic of the past. In that environment, total dependence on a single external protector begins to look less like security, and more like exposure. Recent polling captures the psychological shift. If only about one-third of Germans believe the United States would defend Europe in the event of an attack, then collective defense no longer feels guaranteed. And perception drives policy. When publics doubt protection, governments increase defense budgets. They accelerate rearmament. They talk about strategic autonomy. This is not anti-American sentiment. It is survival logic. European states are not reacting to what Washington says today. They are reacting to what Washington might not do tomorrow. And in a world that is becoming more multipolar, more competitive, and more unstable, even the closest allies prepare for the worst-case scenario. This is not a war of tanks or missiles. It is a struggle over control. Who shapes the future of Western security? On paper, the United States remains the most dominant military power on Earth. It spends more on defense than any other nation. Its global network of bases stretches across continents. Through NATO, Washington has anchored Europe's defense system since 1949. That structure created what strategists call extended deterrence, American power serving as a shield for its allies. But deterrence does not run on hardware alone. It runs on belief. The system only works if allies are convinced the United States will actually use its power when the cost becomes real. When polling shows that only about one-third of Germans believe that guarantee holds, the consequences stop being theoretical. They become strategic. In international security theory, when confidence in an external protector declines, allies respond in predictable ways. They rearm. They increase defense spending. They reduce dependence. That shift is already visible. Germany expands its military budget. France pushes harder for European defense integration. Across the European Union, leaders debate something once considered unrealistic: strategic autonomy. The ability to act without relying entirely on Washington. This is not emotional backlash. It is rational adaptation. Russia remains a direct threat. American commitment feels less certain. That combination creates a classic geopolitical dilemma. Remain dependent or stand alone. But the pressure does not fall on Europe alone. The United States faces its own constraint. Its strategic focus stretches between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. The rise of China pulls American resources and attention eastward. No superpower can concentrate fully in every region at once. That reality forces difficult prioritization. And here lies the true battle. Not America versus Europe, but old dependency versus emerging independence. Not enemies, but diverging calculations. The post-World War II security order assumed one dominant pillar. For the first time in generations, that pillar no longer stands alone at the center. The future of Western security is no longer shaped by a single hand. It is being renegotiated in real time. The Western alliance has not collapsed. NATO still stands. The United States still fields the most powerful military on Earth. On paper, the transatlantic security system remains intact. But geopolitics does not run on structure alone. It runs on expectation. And that expectation is shifting. When 65% of Germans view the United States as a potential threat to global peace and only about one-third believe America would defend Europe if attacked, the fracture does not appear in the treaty. It appears in belief. And belief is what makes deterrence credible. In international relations theory, moments like this often mark the beginning of transformation. States do not wait for alliances to fail. They react to the possibility of failure. That is why European governments expand defense budgets. Why they rebuild industrial military capacity. Why they debate strategic independence more seriously than at any time in decades. The goal is not to replace Washington. It is to reduce exposure in case Washington one day cannot, or will not, play the same role. This shift reflects something larger. For more than 3 decades after the Cold War, the global system revolved around one dominant power, the United States. A unipolar order. But the rise of China and the sustained confrontation with Russia have complicated that structure. Power now disperses. And in a multipolar environment, absolute dependence on a single protector begins to look risky. So the outcome is not the collapse of the West. It is its evolution. America will likely remain central to European security, but no longer singular. For the first time since 1945, Europe prepares for a possibility once considered unthinkable. Not a world without America, but a world where its security no longer depends entirely on America. And in geopolitical history, the biggest shifts rarely begin with open war. They begin quietly, when allies decide they must be ready to stand on their own. The Western alliance has not collapsed, but its foundation is under pressure from something more subtle and more dangerous than open conflict. Doubt. Public perception is shifting fast. Strategic uncertainty is rising. European governments are recalculating their dependence. The United States remains powerful. NATO still exists. Russia remains the primary military threat. China continues its ascent. The structure stands, but the psychology inside it is changing. And power is never just material. It is psychological. If trust forms the core of every alliance and that trust begins to fracture, then the real question is no longer whether the world is changing. It is this: can the West rebuild confidence fast enough before doubt reshapes the global order in its place?